This week on the Men at the Movies podcast, we blast off 500 years into the future with Idiocracy. In this Beavis and Butthead meets Brave New World story, we wrestle with how the past has led us to the current culture. We have a choice to lead, follow, or get out of the way. And we all have fruit that we want to grow, but we need to investigate what we're using in order to harvest the life that God has called us to. Fill up on Brawndo and get cozy in your hibernation chamber as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me, fresh after licking his wounds from the Alabama Crimson Tide losing in the national championship down in Atlanta, Georgia, is Britt Mooney. Hey, man. How you doing?
Roll Tide. That's all I got to say. As I was explaining to Paul before, I really was not licking my wounds. I was not expecting them to get past Georgia in the SEC championship, for that matter. I just did not. I thought their O-line was a little weak this year, and I just didn't think they had a lot of young players. I just didn't think they had it to get as far as they did. And along with injuries, I think they made a great showing for themselves with all that they had to overcome. So I was happy. And I have so many friends who are Georgia fans. I was like, you know what? I can just be happy that these people, after 41 years, get to taste what I get every couple of years.
Oh, that's a classic Alabama fan right there. So how, living in Georgia, I know you haven't grown up in Georgia or anything, but how are you living in Georgia but rooting for Alabama? How did that happen?
So what had happened is I was born in West Virginia, and when I was 2, we moved down to Montgomery, Alabama. And we lived there in Alabama until I was 12. And when I was in the first grade, it was a very serious question. I was like cornered. Are you Alabama or Auburn? And I didn't know.
Your life depended on the right answer.
It seemed like it at that moment. And I knew who Bear Bryant was, and I knew, the hat and the whole thing. That's how old I am. Bear Bryant was still the coach when that happened. And so I said Alabama. And so I've been an Alabama fan ever since and rooted for them. And, they've had some down years too, man. I mean, and it's not going to be very long until Saban hangs it up, because he's not going to last forever. He's my dad's age. So he's not young anymore. And
so that's interesting that you talk about that, because I didn't ask this on purpose, but it fits into what we're talking about today with the movie of being indoctrinated through the propaganda available in Alabama.
Yeah, right. Oh, there's a lot.
So we are talking about what I will affectionately say is the worst movie we have ever done on this podcast.
You did. This was one you did not think was a good movie. So
halfway through it, I texted Brett. I was like, "This is terrible."
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it just hit me and like my friends at the right time. Like there was a group of us that watched it when it came out, and we just thought it was the funniest movie we'd ever seen. But
you weren't a teenager. This came out in 2006.
Oh, no. Look, as I've said before, in every man, there is a middle schooler waiting to happen at any moment, with fart jokes and, all the sorts of crude humor that we enjoy. But no, I was not a teenager at all. But no, it just hit me in the right time. And I really do still enjoy it. Like I was watching it the other day, just laughing. I mean, the parts of it are so insightful to me, and that's what good humor is, right?
Right.
So yeah.
Britt's sentence synopsis of this movie I thought was perfect. And it's Beavis and Butthead meets Brave New World. So we've got this movie from 2006, and it's starring Luke Wilson, Maya Rudolph, Dax Shepard, all people that I enjoy. Directed by Mike Judge.
And written
and directed by Mike Judge. So it's got some star power to it. And so that conversely, I just finished reading Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Came out in like 1932. And so we're going to be touching a little bit on both of those, because we're going to take this movie Idiocracy and we're going to make it super deep, super intellectual, super nerdy, because that's what we do.
Well, and let me just put this out there. I'm not recommending that anybody watch this movie.
No.
You're
not getting that 1 hour and 24 minutes back.
Like I said, it's very middle school humorish. It's short. It kind of goes where it goes and does what it does. But I picked this movie, or I suggested this movie, because there are parts of it that I kind of come back to as very insightful commentary on our culture and on truth in general. And I actually talked about this at my church on Sunday, because I had just watched it again. And, I had a friend of mine come up to me after church, somebody in our church, and he said, well, I know I'm in the right church when my pastor uses idiocracy in the message. Because he was back there cracking up, and out of the toilet, he was saying all the lines with me, but I still, it's a very visual, but very simple example of the power of deception and truth. And so we'll get to that when we get there. But
as with anything, we say that there's truth in all the cultural expressions. If you use the right ingredients and irrigation, and it's what plants crave. It's not.
You say it's a horrible movie, but you keep laughing at it.
There are pieces that are enjoyable. How about that? So we're going to start. The movie starts with this narration of here is where we are. And the interesting thing is we talk about the world in general and the whole idea of natural selection and evolution. And I'm pulling in some other stuff from a book called Is There Anything Good About Men? And in the first chapter, this guy even says, I'm not saying that women aren't exploited. I'm not saying it's more looking at things from a sort of more of a strictly biological, not an ethical or moral point of view. It's not a battle of the sexes or anything like that. It's just how are men looked at. And so the point was, how are we genetically predisposed? And as we see this, the clip will explain sort of afterwards, this leads to the picture of two different couples. One is a couple who have very high IQs who don't end up having any children. And the other is a guy with a very low IQ who has multitudes of children with many different women. But so how do we get to that point? And that's what the narrator is telling us here in this first clip.
As the 21st century began, human evolution was at a turning point. Natural selection, the process by which the strongest, the smartest, the fastest reproduced in greater numbers than the rest, a process which had once favored the noblest traits of man, now began to favor different traits. Most science fiction of the day predicted a future that was more civilized and more intelligent. But as time went on, things seemed to be heading in the opposite direction, a dumbing down. How did this happen? Evolution does not necessarily reward intelligence. With no natural predators to thin the herd, it began to simply reward those who reproduced the most and left the intelligent to become an endangered species.
Because we think about it today, who are the ones who are reproducing? You look at this sort of the cult of celebrity, people searching to be famous, not because they're good at anything, but just because you're a Kardashian, or you have a giant ass, or you put yourself in harm's way. So from this book, I'm going to throw a couple ideas at you here, Britt.
Okay.
and again, this is simply looking at reproduction genetics as a we are animals in like, how do animals do it? Only the alpha males really reproduce. So,
okay.
And in many cases, like if you look at like a herd of wild horses, that only the alpha male would reproduce, and that the male, the stallion, would reproduce with an entire herd over the summer. So you'd have, all of the female horses reproducing, only one of the male horses reproducing. So in animals, it's like closer to 90% of females reproduce, but only about 20% of the males. That leads to this whole like mental dynamic of, because you said that you see this as a commentary on our society. And one of the things that's challenging is to look at our society now as the way it's always been.
Mm.
But if you look back at how did men and women reproduce, the author here, Roy, says, why did it seem so rare for 50 women to band together to build a ship and sail off into unknown seas to explore? Like, you didn't hear that. But for men, they did it because they needed to stand out. Women who sailed off into unknown parts were probably less likely than others to pass on their genes. It would be foolish for women to take on such chances. Instead, stay home, act like the rest of the women, and you will get your babies. But for men, for the man to stay at home and play it safe was not playing it safe, because the average man was not destined to reproduce. Yes, many men sailed off to explore unknown seas, ended up drowning, being eaten by cannibals, or dying from disease, and they lost their gamble. But gambling was still the best strategy, because staying at home for them also meant losing. Some men did come back, rich enough to improve their chances at getting a wife or two and supporting a pack of youngsters. To put it another way, risk-taking for women meant giving up a relatively sure thing for an uncertain chance. Risk-taking for men meant giving up a sure loss, exchanging definite failure for possible failure. And again, viewed in terms of biological criterion for reproduction, it would make sense for men to take risks and women to avoid risks. And so when you look at one of the criteria for men is the competitiveness. He tells a story of how he did this sailing. He went sailing to take a break in these like windsurfing and stuff. And he said almost every day he'd go out and you'd sort of end up randomly lined up with another boat, and you'd make a turn and race the other guy back into the harbor. He's like, almost every day this happened. They get to the harbor, they talk. Both men knew they were racing. But if you talk to, and he asked some women there, and she's like, no, we'd never do that. That's dumb. So what you see is if somewhere between 20 to 30% of men reproduce, whereas almost all of women reproduce, and the women are able to play it safe, and the men are more aggressive, competitive, risk-taking, then it would make sense. And some of the things that you see as now we get, as the movie sort of portrays, this dumbing down, there's no wars, there's no safety, or there's no threat, there's nothing out there. Now it's guys getting competitive at work or on the golf course or playing fantasy football. That competitiveness and that striving for greatness comes out in a lot of ways. So we look at the background, the people that have led us to being here, and where is here as a society, and what is this saying about us moving forward, simply from a reproducing standpoint? Is this making sense, Britt?
Yeah. Yes. It's making sense because, we do have some biological differences, and, I don't know that I would agree with all the numbers, but I would agree that we have civilized men, but we've also feminized men in the last 200 or 300 years, definitely the past 100 years. And what I mean by that is I would put some of that on the Industrial Revolution, where we kind of gave men this kind of ready-made security right? Just get a job at a factory, right? You know, put in your 40 hours. Like men don't have to take risks.
We started punishing risk takers and emphasized safety and stability.
Right. And so what that does to leadership, what that does to creativity, what that does to entrepreneurship. And there are still a lot of guys and women, you know, who are entrepreneurs. But I think that's one of the things that we've done in our culture, because the Industrial Revolution also did this, by the way. It institutionalized everything. It tried to convince us that an institution was the way to get something done, right? Model T4s, you put it on a assembly line, and we do that with education, and we do that with Christianity. I mean, we've done this, you know, and what we're realizing that the way of fathers teaching their sons a craft is still the healthiest thing to do, right? And, you know, we talked about it with Karate Kid,
right.
Like that whole mentor-mentee relationship that we long for as men. So I think there's several different levels to this, but I do think that some of it has been what you just said, that we reward men for safety more than we do for risk taking in our modern culture, and that's not always bad. I mean, that's, you know, there is a certain level of wisdom to say, well, maybe I don't have to get on a ship and go fight, you know, cannibals to get noticed. But, you know, so it doesn't mean like either one is necessarily better in a certain sense, but I do think that there is something that we've done with our modern culture. And I think a lot of men feel lonely because of that, and they don't feel fulfilled because they get all the American dream stuff a lot of times and realize what have we done? And then of course for Idiocracy, it's just pointing out that the intelligent have decided in our culture that you have to be perfectly ready to have a kid. You have to be, you know,
it doesn't make sense to have a kid right now.
It doesn't make sense to have, you know, we're not in a place for our careers. And I hear this all the time. I've thought it. My wife has thought it, right? We're not really ready to have kids, and because of birth control, and we have the ability to make those decisions more often. And you have some people who, if they're not as career minded, you know, why not get married at 19 and start popping out kids, right? I mean, like if that's what they value, you know, some people, that's just what they value. And so, but the way he does it in the movie, I just think is completely hilarious and makes sense. Like natural selection can go both ways. And what are we doing? Like what are we doing now that's going to have effects in the future? You know,
one of the fun parts about this podcast is wrestling with sort of big ideas. So this is one of those big ideas where conceptually, when I was in management and leadership, one of the books that I read that really resonated me, it was basically in the title, "What you accept is what you teach." Like that's the entire book is, well, what are you accepting? What are you saying? Well, that's just Bob being Bob. And so you look at this, what is being accepted? And so you mentioned the church and the programs and the structure, and there is a certain level of the organization to it that's important. You want to be efficient and all this stuff. You want to use your resources wisely. But when you look at the men who are well thought of in church, and this is what John Eldredge talks about in his book, Wild at Heart. The church promotes guys who are thought of as a nice guy. And sure, I want people to think I'm a nice guy. I don't want them to think I'm a dick. I mean, you don't want to be thought of as an uncaring jerk. Like being a nice guy, like what little boy sits there and grows up is like, I can't wait to be a really nice guy, to wear a suit every day. No, it's like, I want to be a cowboy. I want to be a Jedi. I want to be a warrior. I want to be a world war. I want to be, you know, Band of Brothers, you know, whatever it is. That's why young men are like playing Halo and Call of Duty or these sports games, because as Roy talks about in his book, men tend to strive towards greatness. Not that women don't. Again, looking back at how the personalities of the people who reproduced, the masculine traits have tended to be more along those lines. And I think a lot of ways that's how God created us. It was interesting. You talked about this stability, this idea of stability. And there's a story in Genesis where Jacob had 12 sons. They became the 12 tribes of Israel. But he also had a daughter named Dinah. And Dinah, she got raped and kidnapped. And the prince who did it came to Jacob and said, I love your daughter. I want to marry her. What do I have to do? And Jacob's sons, Dinah's brothers, showed up and they were mad. They were pissed. So they said, we can't give her to you because you're uncircumcised. If you want to have us and our women and we intermarry with you, then you've got to circumcise yourselves. And they were like, oh, yay, we can do this.
The whole city.
The whole city. You and every man in your city. So they did. That's some power there. I mean, if you as the prince can say, hey, you're going to cut off the tip.
Well, the argument from the king and the prince was, let's do this. And if we start to intermarry with them, we'll get their stuff. They're so rich. Jacob was incredibly wealthy. So, I mean, it was almost a city unto himself hanging out next door. And so they were thinking this is a way to appropriate them,
Yeah. And so Jacob's sons, it's funny, the third day when they were still sore, I guess they knew that through the third day is the day of the worst pain in the groinal region after
they would know
after slicing the foreskin. They went and killed all the men and they brought Dinah back. And Jacob says, what have you done? They're going to be mad at us. And the son said, would you rather our sister be treated as a prostitute? And the really annoying thing is it just moved on. There's no resolution to the story. But it's that idea of what do you crave most? Are you craving stability? Are you craving comfort, safety, convenience? I don't want to make waves. I'll give up my daughter for that, I guess, so that they don't come and attack me and raise up against me. Whereas the sons, the young men, probably all in their 20s, maybe late teens, they said, no, we're not going to stand for this. This is our sister. She cannot be treated like a prostitute. So even Jacob's sons in this institute. And again, it's interesting because Jacob relied on trickery. And then when his uncle Laban, they were both like master manipulators and all this. And then you see that passed down to his sons where he's passing on that theme of trickery, manipulation, where they tricked the men of Shechem, I think it was. Again, you've got to be a pretty good conniving person to convince somebody to cut off the tip of their wang. So on the other side of this spectrum, not even on the other side, but smack dab in the middle of the spectrum, you've got Joe, who's played by Luke Wilson in this movie, Idiocracy. And he is marked out because he is completely average in every way. He is the dead center, 50th percentile for height, weight, heart rate, blood pressure. He has no attachments. He's really good at, as they say, sitting on his ass and watching TV. Because who isn't good at that? And so they pick him to go to sleep, or he's a test subject to be placed in this army coffin. And he's supposed to be asleep for 1 year because they're like, we want to do this for our best warriors so that when we need them, they can be available for the war. But we don't want to try it on somebody who's like, he's expendable. So we're going to expend him. And he's truly expendable because he's in this coffin. Because they wanted a female test subject, Rita, who is a prostitute off the street. And so they get put in these hibernation chambers, supposed to be for a year, ends up being 500 years. And they wake up and they basically have both become the smartest people in the world. Because of evolution.
So a couple things. First of all, going back to what you were talking about with the men and risk taking and standing up for what's right and all of these things. There was a book 10, 15 years ago called Why Men Don't Go to Church. And it dealt with this. It dealt with the fact that modern church, most of the time, is for women, because, women are going to bring people, their kids, women are going to, this is about attendance, and they're going to bring people, and they're going to, and women crave safety. Men want to be respected. That's how they feel loved. Women want to feel secure. That's how they feel loved. This is generalization, but this is generally true, right? And so church is structured for this. Is structured for safety. And so men don't feel that there are any ways for them to win or take risks or lead or stand out, to use your term, when they go to church. And so, of course, at my church, it's a little different because I'm always switching stuff up. And, it's not that I'm not about safety. It's just, I don't think following Jesus is going to be comfortable. And I don't think it ever has been.
If it is, you're doing it wrong.
So I try to bring, as much as I can, bring people into that reality. But when we're dealing with Joe, he's remarkably average. And there's this, little part at the beginning where his boss is like, you're not doing anything. And you just sit there. His job in the Army is to sit there and do nothing. And this is what we've done in our culture. It started out as, well, it takes so long to wash clothes. And if we save time there, we could use that time more constructively somewhere else. We could do something else somewhere else. Or women could go to work better if they had a microwave and if they had all these conveniences, right? I mean, so there's all sorts of stuff that we've come to, to your point earlier, we've come here, but what we've done is we've made things so convenient, we don't have to do anything, that we actually don't have to be constructive. We can literally just sit and be entertained. And we have a government that feels like they should provide for those people who just, and I know that's can be very controversial and sounds uncaring, but that's kind of where we are this is what we have. And, we have an employment crisis in our culture right now because of in the last 2 years, we've been telling people what's safe and what's not safe, and then paying them to stay home. People get more money for staying home than if they were go out and get a job. Mm-hmm. And that's been part of relief. And I get that. And I want to take care of people, but there has to be, there's a pain point just at some point that has to make you strive for something better. And Joe doesn't have that. Joe doesn't have a pain point. Joe is like, I don't want another job. I like this job. I get to sit here and just watch TV all day. And the guy, the boss, whatever, his captain or, superior says, we've tried to get you to do something, and you're supposed to, we say it all the time, lead, follow, or get out of the way. And he goes, I always choose get out of the way. And he's like, well, you shouldn't. He's like, you should be embarrassed. And he goes, but I'm not. And that's where we are in our culture. I watched a video with Keanu Reeves, who I like. I love Keanu Reeves. Every time I see an interview with him and stuff I've read about him, but this one really kind of rubbed me the wrong way because he was doing this interview and he talked about these. I think they were daughters of a friend of his or his nieces or somebody, and they were teenagers and they hadn't seen The Matrix. They hadn't seen the movie, and this is within the past year because there's a new Matrix out, right? He's doing press for the movie, and he's explaining to these girls what The Matrix is about. It's about the things that we see aren't real. It's all a computer program, and it's lying to you, and it's not real. And the movie is about that. And he said that the girls said, "So what?" And he was, "What do you mean, so what? So what if it's not real? Who cares what's real, basically?" And he said, I loved that answer. And I thought, that's a horrible answer.
What's real really matters.
What's real matters because because lies have consequences. And that's kind of one of the parts of the movie that I like, because deception and not going according to design and what's real, it has consequences. And Luke Wilson, or no, I'm sorry, Joe, the guy in the movie, and I love the fact that he's an average Joe, right? That's amazing. that's not his design. His design was not to just do nothing. I'll just get out of the way. I'll let other people lead or follow and get involved, and I'll just stay out of the way. And that wasn't his design. And so life, in this case, Mike Judge or God, the author puts him in a position where he has to do something, where something has to happen. He has to make a choice. And that choice is, they basically hibernate these guys, Joe and Rita, and forget about them. And that's why programs aren't the kingdom, right? Because if there was a relationship, that wouldn't, right? And so moving forward, he wakes up 500 years later and has to kind of figure this out. Like, at first he doesn't get it. He's trying to find the army. But yeah, so he takes an IQ test in prison, and they find out he's the smartest person in the world.
And so the President Camacho, he's like, you're the smartest man on the planet. So you're going to become the Secretary of the Interior, because the crops aren't growing. They have a problem with the Dust Bowl. They have a problem with the economy, because they can't say that one. And he's going to fix it all in a week. And in doing so, he'll get a pardon. But what you see in the society at large is it is sort of grasping for what's theirs. You see Dax Shepard, who's the lawyer, who's an idiot, and he's sitting on a chair that has a toilet seat built into it, so you don't even have to get up to go. He's drinking, his sustenance is from a tube, and he's watching a screen with the show is Ow My Balls, which is basically all the different ways this guy gets hit in the nuts. So you see that, and that's sort of the people, right? They're scrounging, there's no advancement, there's no initiative, there's no ambition. And so he becomes, through these haphazard situations, he ends up as the president, as the answer. And so he has no idea. He's trying to get to a time machine, thinking that will take him back. Shockingly, by the end of the movie, spoiler alert, it's just a ride.
Called the time machine. Right.
But he's trying to get Rita so they can go back and escape this moronic hell that they found themselves in. And so while they're out, he's playing them, he's manipulating them, still trying to figure out how he can escape. As you mentioned, he's living out of the lie. And he's out there in the field, and the irrigation starts. And the irrigation, he's like, what is this? And it's Brawndo, which is their version of Gatorade. Because at some point, the Brawndo Corporation got so big, they bought the FDA and the FCC, so they could say whatever they wanted, produce whatever they wanted. And so they said, Brawndo, it's what plants crave. It's got electrolytes. Joe goes back to the cabinet, and he says, guys, I think instead of using Brawndo, instead of using this Gatorade for watering the fields, hey, maybe let's try water. So this next clip is all this discussion about what they should do with the fields.
For the last time, I'm pretty sure what's killing the crops is this Brawndo stuff.
The Brawndow's got what plants crave. It's got electrolytes.
So wait a minute. What you're saying is that you want us to put water on the crops?
Yes.
Water? Like out the toilet?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be out of the toilet, but yeah, that's the idea.
But Brawndow's got what plants crave.
It's got electrolytes.
Okay, look. The plants aren't growing, so I'm pretty sure that the Brawndow's not working. Now, I'm no botanist, but I do know that if you put water on plants, they grow.
Well, I've never seen no plants grow out of no toilet.
Hey, that's good. You sure you ain't the smartest guy in the world?
Yeah.
Okay, look, you want to solve this problem. I want to get my pardon, so why don't we just try it, okay? And not worry about what plants crave.
Brawndow's got what plants crave.
Yeah, it's got electrolytes.
What are electrolytes? Do you even know?
It's what they use to make Brawndo.
Yeah, but why do they use them to make Brawndo?
Because Brawndow's got electrolytes.
After several hours, Joe finally gave up on logic and reason and simply told the cabinet that he could talk to plants and that they wanted water. He made believers out of everyone. Joe didn't know it, but the beloved electrolytes were salts that had been building up in the topsoil over the decades, killing plants and leading to the Dust Bowl. As Secretary of the Interior, Joe ordered all crops to be switched to water, promising that over time, plants would grow and the Dust Bowl would end. He was on the fast track to a full presidential pardon, or so it seemed.
Brawndo, it's got what plants crave. It's got electrolytes.
That's the most genius conversation, because I've had conversations with people like that. It's like, well, just do this. Well, yeah, like they just, there's some sort of, something's wrong with the logic, and people just have been told things for so long. And you come in and say, well, it's actually really simple. You just do this one thing different. And to me, it's about design and other people. Obviously, like in this case, it was a corporation who they were profiting off of this propaganda, but it had consequences. The consequences were that there was a food shortage. The consequences were that there was a dust bowl and there was dust everywhere. And there were consequences to these corporate federal decisions, which in the moment are like, hey, let's just do this. And, it's going to give people jobs because that's the consequences of doing it right. The consequences of starting to do it right is that, hey, people lose their jobs. Right. It's kind of like, it reminds me of Paul in Acts. Yes, I'm comparing Paul in Acts to Idiocracy. Paul in Acts, where he delivers that girl from a demon, but she made idols, and it hurts some guy's idol making business. And so he tried to get Paul run out of town because it hurt his idol making. Now, people were worshiping idols, false gods, and he was helping this girl. But of course, Paul gets persecuted in the moment at that time because people, all they saw was that was a consequence, not the ultimate good that was going to come of it. It's overblown to the extreme in the movie to make it just simple and funny, but it's also kind of sad because this is what we do. We'll just do this. But wait a minute, why do you do that? Well, because this is what we're told to do. This is the way it's supposed to be, but there's no life in it. It ends up actually hurting us to believe some of these things that we believe in our culture, because when we get there, we realize, man, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. But God knows the truth, right? God has designed things, and we know the God who has designed things. And so when we come into our culture and we say, well, that's actually not how this works, and sometimes we get persecuted for it. Sometimes people don't like when, but they believe whatever this thing is. Like one of them is just live my own truth. I'm just going to live my own truth. Well, you can have your own story, but the truth is not yours. The truth is absolute. Like, it's not like you have a truth, I have a truth. Like there's a sort of thing that's going on in our culture, and that can exhibit itself in many ways. But there's one absolute truth. And the absolute truth says this, well, I'm just going to live my truth. Well, if your truth isn't aligning with God's truth, then there's going to be consequences for that, because things were made to go by a certain design, and it seems ridiculous. And also I love this part of it, that the thing that the plants needed, they associated with something dirty from the toilet. And that's how people feel about Christianity today. You have to be an idiot to be a Christian. If you believe in science, then you can't believe in God, which is ridiculous. Let me just say that right now. If you don't, we're not going to go all into it right now, but it's ridiculous because the people, by the way, just one example, the people who came up with the scientific method that atheists say is good were Christians. Those people were actually trying to get closer to God by discovering more about what he created. So this whole idea that like Christians are against science, I mean, it's just so ridiculous. It's propaganda, but we believe it. And people get into school and people get into, and they just say those things. And then when you start to sort of question it, their brains hitch because it's not something that they're prepared to
But it's got
hear.
electrolytes.
But it's got but science has electrolytes, and God loves science too. One of the things that starts faith in people from Romans 1 is when you look at the creation and you see that there must be a designer. And we see that happening, by the way. I'm reading a great book about that called Believing is Seeing, where he goes into that atheism and science are not compatible. And Christianity and science are actually way more compatible in what they believe. And it's evident when you start to really look into it. But again, people think, well, if you're a Christian, you're an idiot. Like if you're a Christian, you're stupid, or you don't believe in science, or it's like water from the toilet. And it's like, no, but all these things that are going on in our world, it's like people mock it, but no, we should pray. Right? And people mock prayer now. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but people just mock prayer. Oh, you're just going to pray. Oh, it's like, no, yeah, I'm going to ask the God who has all power to help me. Like, yes, I think I'll do that. The guy who knows everything, who knows the end from the beginning. And yeah, I'm going to ask that guy what we should do. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of where we are as a culture in that sense. That's why I like that part. I do like that it was about design. And that even an average Joe knew. And I love how he was unsure at the beginning. I'm pretty sure.
Because what you've been doing isn't working.
Right. And that's kind of the main reason I love this movie, that and the fact that even an average Joe needed to find purpose and he needed to do something. It doesn't help us to sit around and do nothing. That wasn't the Garden of Eden. Perfection was not sitting around and doing nothing. There was activity that they were supposed to be involved in. That's God's heart for us. That's where we find our joy. So those are the two main things I love about this movie.
As I was watching that scene, it made me think of Brave New World, which honestly, I don't remember why it was on my Amazon list or why I thought I should read it, but I did. And then watched this movie. I was like, there's a lot of similarities. And without getting into too much of the details, basically the civilization has gotten to the point where babies are not sexually reproduced. They're reproduced in a bottle. In a lab, they're grown, and they're actually, while they sleep, they're fed these moral instructions. And so I'm going to read a couple of them to you. So one of them is and you get selected. You're different. You're alpha, beta, epsilon. So it says alpha children wear gray. They work much harder than we do, and because they're so frightfully clever. I'm really awfully glad I'm a beta because I don't work so hard. And then we are much better than the gammas and deltas. Gammas are stupid. They all wear green, and Delta children wear khaki. Oh no, I don't want to play with Delta children, and Epsilons are still worse. They're too stupid. And then they had that repeated 40 or 50 times more before they wake. So 120 times, 3 times a week for 30 months, after which they go to a more advanced lesson. And then they said, till at last the child's mind is these suggestions, and the sum of the suggestions is the child's mind. And not the child's mind only, the adult's mind too, all his life long. And they talk about why. And they talk about why they attachments are discouraged and emotions are discouraged. Solitude is discouraged. Family, monogamy, romance, everywhere exclusiveness, a narrow channeling of impulse and energy. They're saying these things are bad. But everyone belongs to everyone else, he concluded, citing the hypnopadic proverb. Hypnopadic is what they called what they do while you're sleeping. And the students nodded, emphatically agreeing with a statement which upwards of 62,000 repetitions in the dark had made them accept not merely as true, but as axiomatic, self-evident, utterly indisputable. Just like Brawndo. It's what plants crave. Because their goal in life, they talked about no pains have been spared to make your lives emotionally easy, to preserve you so as far as possible from having emotions at all. So their lives are spent with free and easy sex. The director was talking to the students. Has any of you been compelled to live through a long time interval between the consciousness of a desire and its fulfillment? And one of the students responded, I once had to wait nearly 4 weeks before a girl I wanted would let me have her. 4 weeks before a girl would let him. And you felt a strong emotion in consequence? Horrible. Horrible, precisely, said the controller. Again, you get these programs. You're programmed, you're conditioned with all these things. You're conditioned to see sex as not something that should be withheld or waited for, or desire should be immediately fulfilled. And if not, there was something wrong with the person who was preventing it. People were weird for not spending all their time playing. Distractions, golf and all these other things were the big, like, oh, you didn't play golf? What did you do? Like, the idea of walking and talking was abnormal, uncivilized. And it made me think here is, how is our society, how is our culture currently, what messages are we being subjugated to? Like, I know as authors, right, Britt and I were like, you have to have a social media presence. You've got to build your audience. Britt, you were told you need a TikTok. You're like, I don't want to do a TikTok. It seems kind of dumb. And who buys a book off of TikTok anyway? And you're being told, hey, you need this. You need to, you don't play Candy Crush or Golf Clash or whatever new Wordle. That's the new one, right? Everybody, I see that on Twitter popping up now, people posting their Wordle stuff. And it's about almost the mindless consumption of something, to the point where it's just like, oh no, this is, again, not to get into any weird political stuff, but you create an echo chamber of life around you. Yeah. If you are against getting the COVID vaccine, that's you respond the same way as those people on the cabinet. Conversely, if you have had the COVID vaccine and are supporting it, you support yourself so the other seems insane. I got in a big discussion over the weekend with people with conflicting views, and it got a little heated. And it was interesting because we were gathered there to talk about humility. And we were there stating and saying, this is, and arguing about statistics, because as I think Mark Twain says, there's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics. And everybody can find statistics to support their theory, their opinion, their belief. So I'm not going to argue. That's not why we're here. But what I'm here is, what is the propaganda? What is the Brawndo slogan that we're swallowing hook, line, and sinker? Oh, you haven't seen this TV show? You don't like this TV show? There must be something wrong with you. You're missing out. You're not engaged. You're uncivilized. Like you were saying, you pray over your meals. You go to church. Whatever it is, there is something in all of our lives. It's fun. It's funny that you talked about what is our truth, because my pastor preached on that this weekend about this idea of what is our truth. And the truth is, we hold on to a lot of trash. Like stuff that we believe that's not really true. That's not God's truth. Our experience is our experience, but that doesn't make it true. I feel a lot of things that aren't true. One of the biggest things I struggle with is no one cares what I have to say. As someone who does a podcast and wants to write, that's an extremely unhelpful thing to feel or think. If I said, this is my truth, I'm not going to go very far. I'm not going to I'm going to sit on my ass and watch TV and not spend all the time and money and effort putting together the podcast. I'm not going to try to write a book about how movies can deliver the truth of God and transform your life. You're not going to do all these devotions. And it was an awesome example is he had his son up there holding 2 trash bags. And he said, I have the truth, and he had a Bible. But in order to hold the truth, you've got to let go of the trash. And he tossed him the Bible, and he had dropped the trash bags, caught the Bible. And I was like, man, that's a great picture. Like, they had to drop the trash of it's what plants crave. And there's trash that we're all holding on to. There's all these slogans that we're holding on to. And I know we're talking about the new year and all this stuff. But there's trash as we're going into a new year. There's stuff that might look like toilet water that we're supposed to use. And I love that you picked that out, Britt, because that was great. There's stuff that you think is toilet water that you're supposed to use. That, by the way, will draw fruit, because there's fruit that you want to grow. There's fruit that you want to see, whether it's in your life or your wife's life or your kid's life, your job, your work, your friends. There is fruit that you want. But what you're doing is putting salt in the soil. And it doesn't matter how much work you put in. If you continue to use Brawndo to water your plants, you're never going to get your fruit. There's no magic answer in this. As we see, and the last clip we'll play, there's a clip where they use the water, and the water produces plants. But as you mentioned, Britt, the stock options of Brawndo fell because they weren't using it. So there was consequences. People got fired. People lost money. People lost jobs. Joe ends up fighting for his life in some big monster truck rally. There's consequences to both. But you know what the right thing is, because God's going to show you through the Bible, through his word, through the friends around you. You can ask, hey, what trash do I need to let go of so that I can grow the fruit that I really, really want? Because what we might think what we want is a better job, when what you really, really want is a lesser job to give you more time with your family. You don't need to have a big house. You can sell your house, move a smaller one. I don't know. Oh, God knows, as you mentioned, God knows your heart. God knows the fruit that you're called. In the story, God knows Joe and what he needed to survive and succeed. They have this big party at the end because now they're growing. It's sort of like Wall-E. They found a little greenery. And so Joe is getting a promotion, and he has to decide whether he's going to try to go back home or whether he's going to stay and see it through.
You know, I got to get home.
We still got all these problems.
Well, look, you're just going to have to solve them yourselves.
How?
Well, think about it. You're just going to have to figure it out, like we did with the crops.
But how are we gonna figure out about the garbage ambulances and the comedy?
And what about the nuclear reactor in Florida? It's broken, leaking, or something's happening.
I thought it was in Georgia.
Georgia's in Florida, dumbass.
Hey, I know. Let's put toilet water on it. Huh?
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
We did on the crops.
Come on, Brawndo. Hey, you can't leave. Whatever happened to all that leave, follow, get out of the way shit, huh?
And that's what he says. He's like, I spent my life getting out of the way, because it's scary to lead. Sometimes it's scary to follow. But the part that I liked, you can't depend on outside sources to fix your problems. What about the garbage ambulances, avalanches? What about the leaky nuclear reactor? And also, the solution to one problem doesn't fix every problem. Like you see in the Gospels where Jesus goes, and one of the frequent ones is the blind, healing the blind or the leprous. I don't know enough. In my humility, I'm saying I don't know enough, but what I have heard from people that I trust is that he never did it the same way twice. You never see it. One time he spits in a dude's eye. One time he spits in the mud and puts the mud on his eye. One time he says, go see the priest. One time he just says, see. One time he says, he does his thing, and the guy's like, I kind of see. It's like people walking around. It's dimly. It's like, okay, let me try again. And it works. It's that idea of, if you have a hammer, the whole world looks at it like a nail. You've got to have multiple tools. You can't just, toilet water is not going to fix everything. So just the fact that, hey, last year I had this problem, I did this, and that worked. So I'm just going to keep doing this all the time. Well, how's that going to lead you to a deeper intimacy and a deeper walk with God? It's not about formula. It's about relationship, to quote our friend of the pod, Alan Arnold. We want directions, we want instructions, and God is inviting us to a dance.
Right.
And we've just got to, as you say yes. Like he says, hey, man, what is all this? You said lead, follower, get out of the way bullshit.
Right.
Like, are you just talking, or are you going to actually put your money where your mouth is?
He's being reminded of something he said, right? And when he said it, he wasn't committed. He was just repeating what his superior had said to him. He's just repeating something. But now he's faced with that choice. He's faced with the choice of, he wants to get out of the way. He knows there's more problems. He knows there's more stuff to do. And he thinks, well, if I can just go back, maybe I can do something back there and tell them to start reading. Maybe I start reading books, and all of that. And that's just something those are the choices that we have. A lot of times what we want to do is we want to escape. One of the things that I've told people is, when we got back from Korea for years, and we still do a little bit, but for years we had such a great time in Korea, and it was so formative to our growth that when we got back to America, something would happen and it would get hard. We would get online and start looking for other schools and other countries to go work at. Right. But what we thought we were doing was we thought we were trying to recapture this old life that we had, this, what I call toxic nostalgia. Like you're trying to capture what used to be, and we can appreciate what used to be, but realize that's not where we are now. And we have to deal with where we are today. But what we were really trying to do is escape. Yeah. We might have said, but it would have looked cool. Like
God's calling us somewhere else.
God's calling us somewhere else. But what we were really trying to do is escape. And I'm not against God calling us back overseas somewhere, but that's not what God was doing in that moment. It was just hard, and we wanted out, and that's what Joe's doing. It was hard, and he was almost killed, and he was persecuted. And you're right, there are consequences for doing what's right, but those are the consequences that are worth dealing with, because you'd rather, even if you have consequences doing what's right, then it's right. And that eventually doing what's right will have its rewards. And that's, again, because you're going according to the design. You're bringing life. You're not contributing to the chaos. You're not contributing to the destruction and the, putting Brawndo on crops, right? You're not contributing to that. You're not participating in it. And we're coming to this time in our American history where there is so much deception and misinformation that we really have to be sure that we're not participating in lies. At least don't participate in the lie. People can do what they want. They can pass whatever laws they want. There's a lot of things we can't control, but we can control what we participate in. And that means knowing the truth. And that means knowing who he is and knowing him. And then that way you will be able to recognize when the lies are out there, and you just say, hey, man, I'm not going to participate in that. And there will be consequences, but at least it's from a place of life and love, and not just, because you were just repeating what somebody else said.
One of those things, as I mentioned, that big discussion about the vaccine and all this other stuff that we got into, as you mentioned, the don't participate in the lies and how to respond with humility. One of the things I think it would be helpful to carry is the idea that I might be wrong. I might be wrong on my stance with the vaccine, or with masks, or with school closings, or job closings, or the economy. I might be wrong. I might be wrong with what I think about God. And how are you going to handle that if you are? And I think that allows us to not get that enraged of saying, here's what I believe. Here's what I trust. I might be wrong, but here's where I am today. Morgan Snyder talked about this advice that he got is believe passionately, or hold passionately to your beliefs, but know that in 10 years, they're going to change. because we change and our understanding of God changes and our understanding of life changes. So that idea of I might be wrong as we continue to move into the year, just hold on to that as you look at what Brawndo you might have been putting on the fruit you want to grow. And the other is as you're weighing what to do, as you talked about that things would get hard and you'd start looking for other jobs, looking for other opportunities. And a mentor of mine would always say, are you running from something or are you running to something? Because running from something is not going to land you in the right place. Like I've had jobs that I wanted to run from and I would have taken it. But at the same time, I knew God had me staying there because to me, it was when it's time to leave, you'll know. And it was some miserable leadership, miserable work experiences. But the idea that I'm not running from something, I'm going to run to something because that's how I know God is in it. When he says, okay, now it's time. Now you're free. But I still had work to do at the places where it was hard. That's just like that Brave New World. They talked about life shouldn't be hard. We've eliminated everything that made life hard. But what they found was a life that it was devoid of meaning. Yeah. And truth. Because they believed in a lie. It might have been a beautifully written lie, but it was still a lie.
Yeah, lies can sound really good. You know, the devil makes it sound really good. And again, that's why we have the Holy Spirit, and Jesus left us with the Holy Spirit and said it's better that it's this way, because the Holy Spirit, he said, reminds you of everything that I said and will lead you into all truth. All truth. That means scientific truth. That means if you're an electrician, he'll help you there. Literature, medicine,
even
whatever you're doing.
Even a dumb movie like Idiocracy.
Even a dumb movie like Idiocracy. That the Holy Spirit will, not can, not might, but he will lead you into all truth. But we have to be participants. We have to participate in that. We have to be led. We have to be willing to be led and not just get out of the way of the Holy Spirit. Like he wants to walk with us. He wants to play with us. He wants to create with us, going back to, again, our friend, but he wants to do all of that stuff with us. He wants to be on mission with us and purpose that gives us meaning. And we just have to, again, listen. And that way we'll know the truth. And by knowing the truth, we will know what the lies are. Yeah. Because so often people are just arguing over which lie they like best. That's really what's going on. And truth transcends it all. And it challenges us, it corrects us, but lies lead to bondage. This is biblical, right? Lies lead to bondage, slavery, and sin and death. That's what lies do. And those are the consequences of a lie. And our whole world is living by a lie. And what God did is he sent the truth into the lie. That's what Christmas is. He sent a truth into the lie to love. And because that's part of the truth, he's love. But truth brings freedom, right? You shall know the truth, be intimate with the truth, and it will set you free. And he is the way, the truth, and the life. The truth leads to freedom and life. But we only know that by knowing him, like he said. Know the truth. You have to know him. You have to have relationships. So I just encourage people to surround yourself with people and the truth. I write things on my mirror. I don't know if I've said this before on the podcast, but I write things on my mirror with a dry erase marker. I'm writing stuff on my mirror. I'm writing scriptures. I'm writing things that God wants me to remember. And because it's so easy to be distracted by all the other noise. So just whatever you got to do, man, keep focused on the truth, and the other stuff you'll see the difference,
We'll do a quick prayer at the end. Is just, Holy Spirit, show us where the lies are that we're holding on to. Show us where we're watering our fields with Brawndo, stuff that's actually killing and working against our goal. Show us the trash that we're holding on to and help us to walk in the truth. And we hold that, we know that it's true because you've promised, Jesus promised that you will show us the truth. Shine a light, let there be light, show us the truth in our lives so that we may grow fruit, and do the good works that you have created for us. And it's in the name and the power and the authority of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?